Hi, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Dave, and we're the IB English guys. And today we're going to look at a sample piece of student writing. This is in response to a product review for an e-bike. We talked about this in the previous video. This is part of our countdown to paper one. We're going to talk about a product review that had elements of narrative, but it also had some really good product specifications.
That's right, Mr. Giles. Also, that narrative had some fantastic characters.
It
We got to
did.
meet a guy named Vlad, and he reminds me of some of my friends.
That's right.
Folks, just to remind you, the guiding question for today's text is as follows. How does the author combine narrative elements with a product review to make a claim about electric bicycles? Giles, keywords, what do you see?
Well, we're talking about narrative elements, which is storytelling, because this writer is telling a story about suffering on his bicycle and being beaten by Vlad and then turning the tables.
And of course, it is a product review as well because he talks about the product that allowed him to destroy his competition, his friend, and he gives some specifications about the product and reviews the product while telling a story.
And
it's fantastic.
He might be encouraging people to go out and buy an e-bike, and so it's good information it's good informational text.
Mr. Giles, what do you say we dive in and take a look at the intro and discuss what we love and what could be done better?
Well, the first thing I see is voice. This student has gotten off to a really nice start because he's tapping into that competition between friends. And this is the sort of clever thing. I like the short sentences at the beginning. We all have that friend, you know the one.
Yeah, and directly addressing the reader with that punchy syntax. I think it's a bit risky, but I think it has nice voice and probably would entertain the examiner.
Yeah, notice it's only a couple sentences, but then he gets down to business. And I think, again, there's a discussion of text type, there's a discussion of purpose, and of course incorporating the elements of the guiding question. So
Yeah,
good start.
Yeah, great start. Of course, those elements of guiding question are highlighted in green. When identifying purpose, you see phrases like written for a predominantly male audience. We see these really key phrases, Mr. Giles, that indicate audience and purpose.
Yeah.
Good, clear thesis. We're off and running.
Yeah, that last sentence of the thesis is essentially the claim that if you purchase and utilize this piece of equipment, it will allow you to ride longer, ride farther, and be more effortless. That's the claim that they're making.
And that guiding question asks for a claim about e-bikes. There it is.
There it
Giles.
is.
All right.
Okay.
Let's get going. Let's talk about the first paragraph.
Yeah, the first paragraph is focusing on the title. I think that's really wise. We thought that was a clever title, making molehills out of mountains, the way we're subverting that idiom. And this is, again, what the students going to discuss, but we're thinking about the narrative features as well.
Yeah, also, there is a data table in the original text, Mr. Giles, that this student used. Of course, when we did the transcript, we didn't get that, but they want to mention that data table as well because that was a prominent feature, and briefly mention the image as well because that was an aspect. So I think they've kind of combined title, text box, and image together to kind of handle this first paragraph. Really nicely written.
Yeah, and I know exactly where they're going, and they're talking about that sort of narrative. Then the next body paragraph is going to elaborate more on the body of the review itself. This is, again, the beginning of his review, is where he's telling the story about being beaten down by Vlad, who's the Tour de France the Tour de France athlete, while he's wearing a Hawaiian shirt.
Mr. Giles, that visual imagery of the Hawaiian shirt, combat shorts, and a pair of neon Birkenstocks. I love that textual reference. I think the visual imagery is fantastic, and it's funny. And I think, again, that writer is detecting the humor.
Yeah, picking up on humor is really important and hard sometimes. Again, we're paying attention to Jones, the writer, and we're noticing that Jones is in the driver's seat in a few of these sentences, and I think that is really smart. We're thinking about author choices. That's the orange.
That is the orange, and that's all over criterion B. Of course, as we go through this a bit further, because it's a narrative, we want to think about narrative features such as dialogue, such as the exposition of a story. These are really important words for narrative elements, Mr. Giles. I think it's smart for the writer to capture those.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And then again, with that third body paragraph is dealing with that sort of motif of time, and we're thinking about the tone shift, which is, again, a narrative element where we see a shift in the story. Because we have a shift in a whole year, now we have the new and improved writer.
Students, I would highly recommend that to be looking for tonal shifts. And when you see a tone shift, you definitely want to comment on that if that's part of the guiding question, because that's a really interesting aspect of most text. So I think the student's done well here.
Now, we have to remember that product reviews have, like we talked about in our previous video, they have product specifications and product features. They have to tell you about the features of this product. This is what this paragraph's doing. They're talking about the 3 different modes, the 3 different speeds, and they're even naming those speeds in a clever way. We're talking about the price point. We're talking about the size of the tires. We're talking about the battery. These are the product features and product specs.
Yeah, and I think it's clever to highlight those features. The student briefly comes back to the image and they talk about the low angle perspective, the color, and I think that's clever to kind of capture that while talking about the specifications and other product elements.
Yeah, we like that. Okay, so then the last body paragraph, again, is going to be talking about this idea of the joy and the sort of celebration of what this joy and the satisfaction. This is the way the review ends, and it ends on that note, which is, again, encouraging us to buy it, to feel that same feeling.
Yeah, there's just some fantastic figurative language coming in here with illusions as well. We see Vlad's, I think his quads are popping like chicken fillets. I think we see, talk about E.T., Giles.
Yeah,
E.T.
the allusion to E.T. with Elliot's bike beginning to fly, I think that is really a clever image in our minds. We think about that iconic film, that maybe you recognize that image. And again, this sort of effortless flying bicycle in the film is how he feels on the e-bike.
Yeah,
that's really clever.
Mr. Giles, it's nothing bad, but I do notice that in this case, the student has used a very long textual reference, and I think that's a bit unusual because throughout the paper, they're just using nuggets. So I would like to see that as this quote here about the margaritas in the Robert Harris novel. I'd like to see that as nuggets rather than a long quote, but still, it's okay.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. And then finally, we have our conclusion, which is, again, going back to that guiding question, is making sure we're paying attention to the narrative features as well as product specifications. And the fact is, it's an informational piece of writing, but it's also entertaining in a narrative way. I think that's clever and a good functional, strong conclusion.
Yeah, I like the conclusion, Mr. Giles, because the text itself had circular structure, starting with Vlad and ending with Vlad, and really the writer does the same thing here. I think they're kind of mimicking the author's style with their response.
Yeah, and having some fun, just like they did at the very beginning of the paper with that clever hook. We're having some fun with that final sentence, kind of ending with a flourish.
Yeah, and then the final word count comes in right around 1,100, which, we've seen some really good responses in that range. I think the students did well, Josh. What do you say we slap some numbers and score this thing?
Yeah, I like that. So in terms of understanding, I think the student has a really strong understanding.
What makes you say that, Giles?
Well, I think, first of all, they're in the text constantly. They're quoting the text frequently, but they're also really attuned to the use of humor, but also they really have an understanding of text type. So I would peg this out of 5 for understanding.
I would too, yeah. I feel like they've done a really good job with the narrative aspect and the product review. I think they've handled the guiding question well, Mr. Giles, and they do understand that competition and the camaraderie. There's good understanding. That's 5 for A.
Yeah, there's some implications too. I think again it's strong. In terms of author choices and features, my one caveat is that they're clearly, in terms of quantity, this student has so many yellow
Giles,
features.
I feel like they may have taken this out. What am I holding?
That's the spray gun. That's the
spray
fire
gun.
hose,
That's the
right?
fire hose. And what might this writer be doing with the fire hose?
Yeah, they might just be like just talking about every technique they can come up with, but perhaps they should linger on a few of those a little more. And possibly to remember to evaluate them. There's not a lot of evaluative language
There isn't.
here.
I think we sense that the writer likes and thinks it is effective, but they don't actually use those words, effective. They don't do a lot of evaluation. So maybe we want to go B4 on this one.
I think so. I think a 4 on criteria B is and I think it's more about just I'd like to see depth. Yeah, their quantity is there, but the quality maybe is not quite in there.
Maybe less fire hose, maybe a few less features, but more drilling down in depth. Would
linger a little bit on some of these features. And then
C is a strength, I hope you
C is a super big strength. I think the key word is focus. We have a focus on the guiding question here throughout, and we have a focus on the claim, right? That it makes it easier.
Exactly, folks. We, of course, ask our students to light up their papers with multiple colors. The green for our students represents the focus on the guiding question. When you see a lot of green, that indicates C will be high because you're focused on that question.
Yeah, and I think finally language is they're in command of their language. There's clever turns of phrase. There's also good voice. I would put this at a 5 too. So our total's 19. This is a strong 7 paper. Again, with just some recommendations to perhaps linger a little bit more and show a bit more depth.
Just to note, Mr. Giles, I've seen some other writers take on this text coming closer to 900 to 1,000 words. They've received very good scores of 7 as well. So again, the word count is don't fuss on the word count too much. It
Yeah.
can come in at anywhere.
That's right. I agree with you.
Folks, in closing, we hope that this video has helped you understand a product review and sort of how it can be a hybrid between two text types. But more importantly, we hope you're starting to see patterns about how to answer these paper one responses. Mr. Giles, some things to think about in our next video.
Yeah, we just need to think about being close readers, thinking about how we can effectively take apart and read and think about a text before we are about to write a paper.
Exactly, folks. Remember, it's a reading test first.
Yeah.
We'll catch you next time for the next text type. We hope you're doing well with your studies. Let us take you the rest of the way. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, guys.